3, 2, 1. Anthony Darby.
Chuck Hen.
We have special guest Mike Cardozo. Mike, welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
So, as a quick preface, if you don't know who Mike is, he's about to tell you. But our very first guest was actually Manny. And awesome. That was really cool for me to understand that you helped him get his start in the industry. Something that I didn't realize. I mentioned you, and he started speaking so fondly of you, and he actually got a really good, favorable shout out on our first episode.
That's nice,
so that's
man.
really
He's
cool.
a great guy.
It's such a small network in the cannabis industry, and people get to progress so fast. So you may have only known him for a few years, but you literally helped change his life. And it's really neat as we have this profound effect on folks, and the cannabis industry really does the heavy lifting of that. It's awesome. So thank you so much for taking some time and coming on. Give people a real quick bio, and then I'll dive into how you and I first met as kind of early pioneers in the Maryland industry.
Sure. Thank you again for having me down. My name is Mike Cardozo. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, in Montgomery County. Attended the University of Miami down in Florida, and ended up co-founding Chesapeake Alternatives, which applied for processing and dispensary licenses here in Maryland. I got in the industry really because I had a strong medical interest. Since I was in high school, I had been volunteering as an EMT and firefighter, and always loved medicine and the patient care aspect, the patient assessment, and those types of interactions. And I thought this would be a really exciting industry to get into, thought it could really help with the opioid epidemic. And so I took the risk and applied for licensing here in Maryland. I decided not to apply for growing initially. That felt a little bit outside of my purview, but we were fortunate enough to receive processing and dispensary licenses. And Chesapeake was one of the first processors and dispensaries to open, and produces a number of brands. And since then, I've had the opportunity to get involved in a couple other ventures, start some consulting, and that's the gist.
So any of our patients that are familiar with Rythm and Mary's and all of that, Mike was intricate in getting those brands established in Maryland and off the ground. Mike was the second or third, maybe the third. I think Shore Natural we made a purchase from. We made a purchase from Curio, and then Chesapeake was the third. So let's unpack that real quick. So you mentioned you got into the industry. Did you write a lot of your application? Did you guys?
Yes. So my partner and I wrote a significant portion of the content ourselves. We did utilize some help from a consulting firm out of Seattle, Calyx Consulting, on some of the IP, some of the SOPs, but we did quite a bit ourselves. My partner was working at a law firm at the time, and we would go to her office downtown in DC after hours, stay till midnight, 1 a.m, and work on things. And it was a stressful but great learning experience doing that ourselves.
Yeah, you guys also took an interesting route in just applying for processing and dispensaries. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we see either all three or a lot of the grow process connection. So did you have any fears of not having that growing piece when you were going in the market, or did you feel pretty confident there'd be good supply there?
We felt confident that there would be enough supply. Evaluating whether or not to apply for the grow was interesting. We really were drawn to the fact that we would have control over our supply chain if we had it. You can't replace that, the ability to control the product from seed to sale. But we weren't comfortable with the risk capital required, the margins, and the technical side. We felt that with our backgrounds and our advisory board's backgrounds, that processing was just a greater value add opportunity, a bit safer, easier to control. And to me, and my interest on the medical side felt like the future that I really wanted to take the company in. And we knew that we could bring in growing in the end, which we did. But of course, that always comes at a cost, and we, paid for that, especially early in the market when we wanted to make sure that we had enough supply to extract.
Yeah, you guys were paying top dollars for flower. I mean, mm-hmm. So the market is so much different than what it was when we first opened up, and sometimes it's easy for me to forget, probably because it was so painful. Mm-hmm. So I mean, literally my relationship with Mike was I met him through some networking events. I feel like we kind of really hit it off. We felt like we both had a very patient, focused strategy. We had a shared interest in making a big impact in the opioid epidemic using cannabis. But we're both in business, and I am coming from a dispensary owner standpoint where I'm approved, I'm open, I'm able to distribute cannabis, but I can't find any to distribute. And I'm literally hounding Forward Grow, because they're supposed to be the ones that got the earliest start, and they're going to be the ones.
This went on for like 3 or 4 months, too.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, we were approved in August.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I got, so we first got our certificate of occupancy. We first got our, it was a CO come, and I celebrated.
Yeah, you celebrated. It was like the fire marshal inspection.
Yeah,
I celebrated the wrong inspection.
That's a big day.
Pretty quickly after we got our CO, and I'm pretty sure we had our CO by September 1st, and we were basically approved and ready to go.
We waited for the inspection. I think we finally got our license October 23rd or something.
So all the expenses to get open, now monthly expenses coming in. We told our story. We had no money, so like we had to get open. We had to have product. I remember finding out that Forward Grow sold all their product to processors, and literally just I can't. The amount of F words that I said to Gary Magnum. I don't even care. I hope he hears this because we're cool now. But at that time, I was just not a happy camper, and I didn't know now what I knew then, or I know now what I didn't know then, and understand why things would go to processors and things like that. But then, like, kind of ball was in your corner, right? I mean, you guys took a big chunk of what Forward Grow had.
Yeah, it really started early on with our strategy, with being really first movers. When we got the processing license, we weren't assigned a county yet. Of course, that ultimately was Queen Anne's. We didn't apply with real estate lockdown, and so we had 1 year from that day when we got that email for the pre-approval to execute. And I think my partner and I, that was our ultimate fear, was screwing this up because we were late. And so over time, that strategy evolved into bringing in a strategic partnership so that we could have brands ready to go, our retail branding and design ready, product formulations, things like that. So, and we ended up being, I think us and Curio, the first two, and that was a great advantage, but also was a very steep learning curve for us early in the market. Of course, the first thing that always happens is the pricing. And whenever you have a brand new medical market, it's always a pretty interesting curve. And the dilemma for a processor like ourselves that were independent and not operating our own cultivation was, here we are ready to produce products, but we only have, one option from a grower to buy from. We can't really do anything about that price. Yet that price is going to dictate how it moves down, from our pricing to the retailers. And of course, an example between you and I really value relationships, and I had been building them for quite a while. And when the market opened, there were a lot of people anxious to get product. So what we tried to do was balance being early to market with being responsible suppliers. So we stockpiled for a bit till we were sure that we weren't going to run out immediately, and tried to offer supply in a fair way, distribute it fairly, as quickly as possible and efficiently, and then scale up as rapidly as we could. But it was tricky.
Yeah, it was and for us, I know that was a big fear that Darby and I both had on the retail side of things. It's like, okay, well, we have these products this week. What are we going to have next week?
Right.
And I remember there being, times where there was a lull. Somebody would come to market, once, and they'd have some flowers, maybe some processed products, and then a month goes by and they have nothing to offer.
Yep.
So that was it was appreciated for you guys doing stuff like that to keep that constant supply.
I thought you guys did an amazing job of being mindful that this is a patient market, in terms of the fairness that, I always felt like if patients ever had issues or anything, like you guys always did a great job of it. And to your point, you guys didn't run out. You guys were able to give us a pretty consistent product time after time. And when patients asked for stuff, I knew that there was things that got prioritized to get that their way. So, and I can't imagine. I mean, now that we understand some of the challenges that you guys had, I mean, I had Cam from Shore Natural on here, and we were joking with them in terms of like the market was so brutal to the growers and to the vendors because the patients are screaming, "Give us products yesterday! Give us products yesterday! Give us products yesterday!" This is a crop that grows, right? This isn't something that you just like.
Right.
Manipulate, and then it comes and they're the biggest critics like the
Right.
world's ever seen. Like they rushed the drying process of this flower. It wasn't even cured properly. It's like, why do you think they did that, right?
I tried to I had a unique perspective, one that I really valued, which was the dispensary side and the wholesale side. And
right, because Rise Dispensary was also under your purview at that point as well.
Exactly. So Rise Bethesda was the processing license, and still is that Chesapeake Alternatives received, and with our partnership, Rise Silver Spring as well. So I had been involved on the dispensary side heavily from the beginning, as well as the wholesale. So in fact, each day, once operations began, I'd go to the dispensaries during the day, and then usually the wholesale in the evenings. And it's really it's a testament to the team out at Chesapeake Alternatives in Centerville that do an incredible job. Andrea, our chemist out there, is responsible for all those great products that people enjoy, and the production team keeping those things on schedule. You know, to your point, knowing what's coming, keeping a variety of strains out, which we believe in. But I also tried to be understanding of the dispensary owners' perspectives, because I was, dealing with that during the day, ordering, seeing pricing.
And you could have kept all the product for yourself and just sold out of it. I mean, you didn't necessarily, you would have gotten crushed from all of us. But
exactly, relationships.
You could have very easily, if you wanted to, just sat on that. And I'm sure there's people arguing for you to do that.
Exactly. But again, relationships are everything. They're very important to me. And I knew that in this industry, it's too small. You start doing things like that, and you find yourself alone pretty quickly.
Having to rebrand your name.
Yes, gets pretty lonely if you do that. Yeah. So we wanted to keep everybody happy, but it's a tricky dynamic because, I have a lot of friends in this industry that are genuine friends that I'm very grateful for, and at the same time, at the end of the day, you are going home. You are competitors, and if you have to both acknowledge that. But it's one of the things I love about the industry. It's truly collaborative. I mean, the number of times people dropped everything to help me in a meaningful way, or give me information that in most industries it would never ever happen.
Share that stuff.
Proprietary, confident people just keep their cards really close to their chest. In this one, though, there's sort of this us against the world mentality almost, which oftentimes it ends up being a great thing, and people help each other out. Nice.
What was your feeling when you guys got approved? Do you remember where you were at?
Oh, of course. I was sitting in my living room. I had been pressing refresh on the... I'd been going like this for, what was it, like 4:30 those emails came in? I was just going like, my computer had frozen for like 20 times.
The application came at 4:30 on a Friday, and I was doing the same thing, refresh.
I really remember the processing the most, because that was the first one. And I know I was sitting there in my apartment just refreshing it, and I was just unbelievably nervous and running, both scenarios through my mind. And I remember I called my dad as soon as I got it. I said, it worked, we got it. And then I called Rebecca, and we
called your dad before you called your partner?
I did.
Oh my God.
I know, because Pops had been a big supporter, especially with the, just the stress of starting a new company and learning a lot about the legal side and things. So I'm very fortunate. My family was very supportive of me.
I was sitting in my living room doing the same thing, refresh, and then it popped up, and then I was like, I can't open this. Like, I'm gonna find out now. Like, what if it says bad news?
It's life changing one way or another.
I read it, and I just started crying. Like I was so overcome with emotion. We had worked so hard to write that application ourselves, and we submitted our application for $5,500. So at that
13 minutes before the deadline.
13 minutes before the deadline.
That's amazing.
That includes all the fees, and we applied in 2 districts for 55. It's pretty wild. I quit my job. Mary Pat quit her job. We were just 14, 16-hour days, and Chuck was doing 20-hour days of splitting both, and it was
awesome.
It was a really one of those things, like you look back at those times now, it doesn't even seem believable. It does seem like part of a movie sometimes when I think about like the life that I was living and like how all this happened and the delay. I mean, that year of not knowing whether or not the dispensaries were getting approved or not, I did everything from 10 bar to sell software in China.
Oh yeah, I was doing Uber drives to pay the rent while we were waiting for that application.
Solid.
Oh yeah. Yep, you got to do entrepreneurial life.
Yeah, man. It's a little different now.
No more regular paychecks once you decide to go down this road. And we just,
I make everyone come on this podcast. Tell the audience that you were broke when you got in the industry. Tell them.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I'm always like, did you take a pay cut or did you get a raise? Oh, I got a pay cut. Oh,
totally. And that was a big thing that I think I was a little naive to at the time. Was you're just taking your stability and your financial security and tossing it out the window and rolling the dice. And
by the way, for us, we signed documents that says like the FBI and anybody that wants to can come in for a warrantless search of our house and like
titles to your cars and vehicles and houses.
And like the personal infringement. I mean, like, Mary Pat's got a bank with her name on it saying that she's been part of a cannabis industry. I mean, all these different things happen to us. And before we got a lot of the rewards. So it was it's cool to talk about those times because for the most part, we've all survived and we're all plateauing in the right trajectory, and it's kind of cool. So you made the change, and when you mentioned GTI, so first off, are Rythm vape pens the best in the country?
I think so.
I would argue
but it's pretty cool. There's some awesome technology that is coming out now. I love watching and keeping up with kind of the relationship between technology and cannabis and the quality. And
the more we're getting that big science like introduced in the cannabis industry, we're seeing amazing like leaps and bounds in terms of getting in and really understanding, like the entourage effect is one thing, but to really understand CBG and CBN, some of these lesser known cannabinoids, and to really get into the terpene profiles and understand the kind of the give and play between the two, of course CBD and all of that, it's really exciting. And as the equipment gets better and the technology gets better, as more professionals don't feel like they're throwing their lives away and feel like they can justify to their family that they can come over, we're really seeing like a renaissance within the cannabis industry.
I can give you a little window into the thinking behind Rythm and how we brought these brands to Maryland. If you want, we again, just going back to when we first got the license, there's sort of two approaches that you can take as an entrepreneur when you find yourself with a license in a new market in this space. You can pursue the mom and pop route, so to speak, and there's a lot to be said for that. I think it's actually a really important part of the industry. And the other route is entering a strategic partnership. So anytime you have a limited license market like Maryland come out, as most medical markets are, you're going to have people who didn't win licenses who are well qualified, capitalized, who operate in other states, who bring resources that you are guaranteed not to have if you've never done this before. And on the personal level, as an entrepreneur, that was a challenging perspective for me to find initially. I didn't want us to need help. I didn't want to kind of share this baby. You create this baby and it's your thing and your life, and your blood, sweat, and tears go into it. And at multiple points during the startup process, if you're lucky enough, you're going to face points where you have to give pieces of it up. And ultimately, we decided that it would be most advantageous to us if we had those resources brought in, prefabricated brands that the formulations for which were existing and that we could practice on and train on. Of course, capital. Retail, same thing. Developing a retail brand from scratch is tricky. So Rise was operating 2 stores, one in Nevada and one in Illinois, I believe, at the time. And we saw with GTI a partner who could respect our vision for the importance of patient interaction, quality, and bring us a diverse brand suite. So me being on the medical side, it was really important to me, and I love the product. I have for a long time, and I wanted to make things that I would want to use and that I felt would help people. So, part of that was our interest in Mary's Medicinals. I think transdermal technology has a huge place in the industry. I tried to think about patients like my parents and grandparents who, maybe aren't necessarily going for the Rythm pens and want something a bit more mild that accomplish different things. I was very interested in the antiemetic, the anti-nausea properties of cannabinoids, and I saw transdermal patches as a great delivery method for those. Also, just more of a systemic rather than a localized product, so something that's going to target the whole body over a long period of time. I thought there was a real void in the market for accurately dosed extended release products. And so Mary's Medicinals I saw as the leading brand. GTI was able to bring them to us, as well as Rythm. And with Rythm, for vape pens, this was a huge focus of mine, and where I felt my knowledge could really be valuable, and where I wanted us to differentiate. So I had some philosophical rules. I did not want additives in a product. I wanted the hardware to be of a certain quality, of which there's a huge range. And I wanted and I wanted terpenes. I wanted terpene retention was a borderline obsession.
Cannabis derived.
Yes. Oh, cannabis derived. Absolutely.
Not just little from lavender.
Absolutely.
The real stuff.
Exactly. I'm a big believer in full spectrum effects of the plant, terpene profiles, and we've seen amazing results with that. And I wanted to show people terpene profiles and help expose them. And they're still on every package, in part because we want to educate the end consumer. And indica sativa hybrid really don't get you far enough with understanding effects. So terpene profiles, additive free, using CO2, even the machine selection, which is how you and I ended up meeting. Spent a lot of time touring machine facilities out west and the extraction companies. Exactly. And
that's right. That was actually
IES,
that was the connection.
Yeah.
Was Zach Hopkins?
Yes, the salesman for the extractor.
He's with Kush Company now.
Yep. And so really just creating a high quality sort of connoisseur artisan type process for those products, and having a lot of diversity. We wanted to offer sublingual products, things so we have a great tincture line and called the Field Collection, and the same thinking went into that with the ingredients behind it.
And now Field Collection's got an amazing sleep tincture, which is CBN, which I'm really big on.
Me too.
And THC.
So I'm glad you brought up CBN. That was another sort of reason that I was so interested in this partnership and these brands was companies like Mary's were one of the few that were even working with CBN, and it's tricky. On the production side, CBN is not easy. I think it's one reason you don't see a ton of it. Of course, it's also one of the cannabinoids less talked about in general. Everyone talks about CBD, but CBN, CBG, these are still sort of under the radar. CBN is a degradative, so if you leave your bag of weed in the shelf, in the drawer for a year, it's going to go up in CBN. But of course, that method is not practical to use in a lab. So creating a lab, requires a very careful balance of heat and other parameters that, again, Andrea, our chemist, did an amazing job figuring out, and that I was really excited and anxious to bring to market because, in addition to its sleep aid properties, I think one of the most exciting things about CBN is the neuropathic benefits. It seems to be very helpful for people with things like neuropathy. We actually, at our Bethesda store near Walter Reed, we have a lot of veterans come in, and we're finding amputees and people with other nerve-based injuries really like the CBN products. So
that's excellent.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your perspective of kind of your journey, because as of now, we've kind of done the opposite in terms of we've stayed the mom and pop route, but there's give and takes to both strategies. And like when people see how long it takes us to roll something like online ordering, or when you think about how our shop looked 18 months ago and how it looks like now, and the progressions and the iterations and the advancements that we had to do, because we didn't have a full resource of capital. We didn't have proven strategies for our CBD business. I mean, for Chuck and I literally spent months just getting a box and packaging approved. Yeah. Right,
and that has the right nomenclature
FDA,
on there.
You don't say anything you're not allowed to say, but you still make it so that someone can understand it when they're just coming. One of our retailers says, "How come it doesn't say CBD on the box?" Well, I can't.
Right,
you can't.
Against the rules.
Against the rules. And I think sometimes we struggle, and we're really proud of our DNA and what we put out there, but I don't. This method that we chose, if we were a processor or a grower, we would get eaten up by the big guys. I mean, it really is a strategy that's great if you can do it, but there's a reason why you see there's going to be 8 Curaleaf or 7 now Curaleaf dispensaries, and there's several Rise dispensaries, and it's because it's not easy. And when people have this proven model and this multi-state operators saying, I'm doing this in 3 other states and it's working for me, it's compelling to small businesses. And like, we sit around here talking about how we don't make a lot of money and how all the money we make goes to pay taxes. Well, imagine these dispensaries that there's 5 within 15 square miles and they're doing half the volume that we're doing, and their margins aren't as good because they're not as savvy as we are. Like, these guys are all potential to be bought up in the next 2 years. And I think there's going to be a ton of M&A over the next 24 months where multi-state operators are going to come into these dispensaries that can't pay their taxes, that this is way harder than they originally imagined it was going to be. They're feeling the pressure from their neighbors, and they say, you know what, I give up. I'm just going to bring in kind of the expert.
I think so. Maryland also creates a unique landscape they don't require vertical integration, so they've allowed for, single retail license holders and vertical ones and everything in between. And that's created a difficult landscape for everyone, I think, because even for the independent processor, dealing with pricing with other vertical growers and things like that. And truthfully, with my experience, being absolutely honest, I wasn't sure if it was the right route for us. It was a very difficult decision for me, whether to stick to it ourselves or to partner, because you do feel, a little bit of a sense of loss of control, I think, for any founder of any company. And
which you might feel just by bringing on investors, right? Like, you talked about, like, I don't know anyone in our position, no matter how rich they are, there's no one that's 100% owner of their license that I know of.
Right.
And sure, maybe there's one existing out there, like a little guy. But to your point, like, and as you start giving away, the minute you ask for $1, chances are that person feels that they now get to give you their opinion.
Exactly.
And so as a mom and pop, you don't have the option of doing it on your own. You're either going to borrow money and hope that you maintain control, or like Mike, you bring in a strategic operator and hope that you get to maintain some control. But chances are you have to bring on somebody, and you're going to be fighting for that control.
That's right. And for me, being my first endeavor into the space, it was the right move. In the end, there's no question about it. It's helped us business-wise tremendously. And over the last few years, just personally, I've become more confident in my understanding of the industry. And in our case, this was the better way to go. But in new markets, I view it a little bit differently, of course.
Yeah, and that's a great transition into some new markets. But the last thing that I will say is just shout out to GTI. I mean, people ask me, like, what companies do you think are strong that are out there? I would argue that GTI is one of the stronger, and this is no reflection, you don't even need to comment on it, but just my opinion is that GTI is one of the stronger companies out there in the marketplace. The products that they put out to market are of the highest quality. I'm really excited to see flower coming in the near future. I know dog walkers are coming soon with somebody else's flower.
That's right. They've been great partners.
And I argue my Rythm pen against anybody in the country. Like, I basically, I am a vape cart enthusiast. And thank you for letting me be so bougie and snobby about my vape carts, because I get to be like, fuck you mean you don't have 8% terpenes in your vape cart?
You and me
like,
both.
You better, like, yeah, like, and that was when the THC noise was deafening and all people wanted was THC. Your carts were like one of the products of like refuge for us, because we could say like, forget THC. Like, you ever tried something that's got 2% pining or 3% pining? Like, how about 6% myrcene or 5% myrcene?
Yeah.
Like, go chill on this 76% THC, but 4.5% myrcene and beta-caryophyllene and linalool that's just going to chill you out, and then tell me that terpenes don't make a difference.
Exactly. That was one of the challenges. It was a lot of fun, but remains challenging to pass on the terpene knowledge and importance down to the customers, because it's one thing to do it in our own stores where we're there, we're training the people, we can control the flow of information. But when you're distributing to a number of other dispensaries in the state, it was important to us to send our own people there, educate personally about our products.
You guys were heavy on the pop-ups early.
Yes, because we wanted to make sure that patient consultation was providing the right information to the consumers. Plus the fact that the terpene profiles are just so much more effective for treating specific symptoms. So we've seen great results.
Yeah, and like everything else, the prices come down significantly. Mm-hmm. I remember when those bad boys were $80 for the half cart, right?
Of course.
I mean, and now I think, they're probably closer to 60, 65, and maybe even 55.
I think a lot of that was more wholesale, more growers coming online. For a while it was just, 1-2 growers. So it was.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know what you guys were paying.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were paying for starting material what I was paying for end product in some cases. It's pretty crazy. All right, so kudos to you for bringing in a great operator and passing the baton a little bit to GTI. But then that frees you up a little bit. So probably the thing that I was most interested in talking to you about was not necessarily reminiscing, we can do that, but your knowledge on the future emerging domestic markets and international markets is what really intrigues me. No one ever talks about international markets, and it's something that that you have at least a fundamental understanding of and a high level understanding. So let's keep it domestic and we'll work our way out. So domestically, what are the top 3 markets that are hot that are coming on right now?
Sure. So the last 3 that I've been looking at recently have been New Jersey, Missouri, and Illinois. They're all unique. They always are. Illinois is transitioning from medical into recreational. New Jersey is expanding its medical program, anticipating recreational very soon. And Missouri is launching their new medical program.
Is Missouri the one with like a couple hundred dispensaries, like 600 or something crazy like that?
Yes. So that is a great point. So as we look at these markets, I kind of use an algorithm of sorts, to evaluate the different parameters to see how attractive the market is. And, those are things like state population, qualifying conditions, number of licenses, regulatory
we
restrictions.
always look for qualifying conditions and number of licenses.
And populations of local areas. It's like,
exactly.
Try to model something out from there.
And flower. It's got a flower.
Right. Are they restricting any major categories like edibles, flower, things like that? And, one of the main things that I'm always concerned about is saturation from too many licenses. We've seen it plenty of times, Colorado, Washington. If my really strategy entering these markets is coming in to limited markets, not trying to enter a really progressive, saturated one. So for me, I try to really live by, the entrepreneurial lesson of being able to walk away from opportunities as much as dive in. So for us, after taking a really close look at Missouri, the number of licenses that they were planning to award for 12 million people were in the hundreds. And so I felt that with a population of, I think about 9 million, so a little more than Maryland, but similar qualifying conditions, similar program, what I anticipate to be a similar patient rollout rate, the Missouri market was geared to take a long time to become profitable. So we chose to wait. There's also often a very significant requirement to partner locally in whatever state you go to on some level. And if you can't find a way to do that in a meaningful, valuable way, it's often just not worth, in my opinion, not worth the pursuit. So in Missouri, for those combined reasons, we decided to hold off. And I'll be interested to see how that market works with the number.
Are you guys going after all three verticals in some of these markets?
Yeah. So again, going back to what we talked about in Maryland, I did learn the value of having your cultivation in your supply chain and the expense of not. So also with quality, we've seen a range of quality control in Maryland and other markets, and the ability to own that yourself is invaluable. So it's
amazing how much, real quick, if you don't know what he's talking about, like whether or not someone machine trims or when they dry or how they cure, to the processor makes all the difference in the world.
That's right. And at the end of the day, when someone picks up a Rythm pen, they're going to see Chesapeake Alternatives GTI on the package. They're not going to see the cultivator necessarily that goes into it. But if there's a problem with the product at any level, it's your reputation as the processor on the line. So if you're taking in input material from whomever, you need to be ready to stand behind it and make sure that
we saw that with the recall.
Right.
Honestly, to get the Stardog vape pens out of Corpon and Chuck in my hands from the state was like, I almost wanted the inspector to come down and grab myself, because I was like, I know there's nothing wrong with those damn pens, and we finally got the 1 gram Stardog pens in, and now you're gonna make me take them away,
right? So yeah, to that point, vertical integration is part of my new approach always. So we're applying for all three in all these states. New Jersey has a ton of political support. Governor Murphy out there is very, very into the cannabis world, and they ended up at the last minute scaling back from over 100 licenses to about 30 or so. So while we already had a lot of content built for that application, again, we just decided pump the brakes. We can always apply in New Jersey when the time is right, but we didn't feel that was the best chance. So
too competitive, and they were probably already giving
out. Just didn't feel quite right, and the license restrictions.
It's a fine line, right? If it's too easy, then we don't want to go that route. And if it's too hard, you don't want to go that route. And we've dabbled in the consulting thing a little bit, not anywhere near to the extent that you did. And now we're starting to look at some different states and stuff. And for us, it's about finding a partner that has the political local capital.
Exactly.
Because we had that in Salisbury.
Exactly.
It was one of our biggest keys to our success. And I know that I can't replicate that.
That's it.
And somewhere else, right?
That's it. Is politics, relationships, connections. It's huge in this business. And you and I both went through it in Maryland, and I continue to be active in the legislative and political communities. But for as valuable as I saw it being in Maryland, it reinforced the fact that going into new markets, that I don't have the same level of connections there. So always start early in any new market and try to find kind of a local on the ground navigator who does have those and whose you can leverage. So that kind of brings me to Illinois, which we've settled on and are pursuing pretty aggressively right now. I would say I've sort of become a inadvertent student of these regulations over the last couple of years. I couldn't say, the word regulation literally used to make me feel sick when I first was learning about Maryland, because it just seemed like this huge book of things that you could screw up and get in trouble for.
That Comar binder,
exactly.
We still have it hanging up in the shop.
Exactly. And over time, I've come to really appreciate them and really enjoy learning the intricacies of them, because for one, evaluating a new market, they're huge, and two, the more complicated they are, it actually is an advantage. If you can figure out a way to stay compliant with them, it can really help separate you. And so Illinois just released new regulations that I think are by far the best in the country. They are the most thoughtful and evaluated other states' mistakes. And they really hit it from the business side, competition-wise, and from the social equity standpoint, which, we know what happened in Maryland. That was a big lesson. The state didn't feel that there was any precedent of discrimination because it was a nascent industry. And that backfired in a way that resulted in more licenses. And it's a really it's something I've come to really appreciate the importance of diversity in the space and the lack of equal opportunity.
Me too, and even the disproportionate way that folks have been punished for cannabis based upon socioeconomic and the color of your skin. I mean, I think we struggle sometimes with so kudos to Illinois, and I'll be excited reading up with the regulations, but I think with all of our legislatures, there's so many micro vertical topics within cannabis, whether it's social justice, whether it's pediatric patients, whether it's gun rights, whether it's all these different things that affect cannabis. It's tough to get us all to come together on things sometimes. So, because there's so many different special interests. So kudos to Illinois for getting it right. But you're right. I mean, the social justice thing is something that it's tough to ignore. If you're someone that believes in facts, then you look at the stats in terms of arrests and then the repercussions of those arrests and stuff. It's something that needs to be addressed.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
I just one thing that Illinois did that's really amazing and jumped out at me is on that front, they're doing an automatic expungement for almost 800,000 marijuana-related crimes that will automatically just erase the records of people. And I think that is hugely impactful. And just a couple other things on the social equity piece. They're requiring 51% participation locally from minorities in disproportionately affected areas, which we've seen some other states do, but Illinois is requiring it in a very meaningful way. And they're creating a $20 million basically minority small business fund for applicants that can't otherwise get loans, which I think are two very real ways that sure, they make life a little more difficult for applicants like myself, but they're important and they're going to have real results. So it's exciting.
It is so not just like minority applicants, but just like if you're a Joe Smo and you want to actually try to do what we did, like one of the reasons that we are these outliers is because, like, quite frankly, it's not an easy business for someone of meager means or average means to execute on. Like, you're competing against millionaires and billionaires. Like, it's tough for anybody. There's no loans. There's no small bank that's you're going to walk in and convince Mr. Smith that you got a great business plan. Like, there's a reason why a lot of these small dispensaries are struggling and they're getting bought up and stuff. It's because of the dynamics of this stuff. So without a fund like that, where, like, it's one thing if you're a minority applicant and you can write an amazing application, but then what? You're probably going to some rich white guy to get the money.
And I've done some, through mentorship and consulting, I've been involved with some minority applicants in different realms, and that's exactly what happens. Is there's always a point where capital is needed, and finding the right partner for that.
Harvest in Pennsylvania, right?
And maintaining meaningful diversity is tricky. So I'm a big believer in it, trying to do my part to help facilitate it.
It's definitely important. So when is the deadline for Illinois?
So Illinois is staggered. They're actually not even releasing applications till mid-October, and then the dispensaries will be due around January, and the growing and processing in the spring. So they're doing
dispensary first, huh?
So dispensaries first. They're going to award 75. This is just for recreational. So the existing medical license holders in Illinois, as is often the case, will be grandfathered in. Okay. They'll have about a year.
As soon as they get the dispensaries open, they'll be able to get product from the medical side.
That's right. So we're really pursuing the recreational side. Illinois, I think, is a great recreational market. They always have been on the black market in Illinois. It's similar to Florida, significant. It's always been a significant cannabis market there. And one of the really exciting things about Illinois is they're legalizing consumption lounges, which is the first state to really regulate it. Of course, it'll be up to municipalities, and it'll probably be a little while before you see them. But and then actually, Illinois is the first state to legislate cannabis sales. So not by a vote, but to actually legally say this is the new law.
Everything else has been done by referendum?
Yes. The closest thing was Vermont, but that was just possession. So
go ahead.
Exciting.
No, go ahead. I'll for a second.
All right. So I get this question a lot. What if Maryland goes rec? What are you going to do? All right. Mm-hmm. And my kind of canned answer is, For me, it's just an access issue. It just more people have access to my shop. I'm not changing the way that I approach cannabis. I'm not going to all of a sudden have tie-dye tapestries hanging and Nag Chamba burning in the fucking waiting room. That's not my deal. I've never been like that. It'll be a holistic wellness campus where if someone on a whim wants to be able to try cannabis, they're going to be able to do it without having to go see a doc and get a stamp and all of that. So for me, it's more of like a bureaucracy issue more than like a culture of we're going to be patient-centric and wellness-focused. I assume you're kind of a similar mindset, right? Like you're not just going to all of a sudden try to like get people, get 14-year-olds to start ripping dabs, right?
Yeah, how'd you know that's
That's what the whole business is predicated on.
Cardozo Strategies. Broke their mission statement.
Come on in on Saturdays. We'll teach you. No, I think you and I have always had a similar mindset, Darby, about the medical side of this. It really does matter to us. The medicine is critical. People need to have a medical access in the medical side of this. Owners in the industry have a responsibility for when markets move from medical to recreational to keep their medical as a priority, even though the numbers aren't as attractive. I balance this all the time. There's the business side where recreational, it is what it is. It's access, it's higher volume, higher sales numbers, and I'm a big believer in access. I think that people should have this. But I also dread a world where patients can't go into a store and get really good medical information because it's too focused on
CBN or a tincture because all they see is...
Exactly. That needs to be preserved. And my hope is that dispensaries will keep, maybe it's a section of their store, or medical access will still exist.
So in like a state in Illinois, for example, just a random question because I know it's done differently in different states. So would they allow a recreational medical shop to kind of share their same facility, and there might be two doors, almost like it is in Colorado, or are they separate?
Interestingly, Illinois is only allowing the existing medical license holders to remain. So there will be no new medical licensees in Illinois. So what will likely happen is those existing stores will open either locations in the same place that are recreational, as you're describing, or separate recreational locations. I hope that they do it in the same structure, just because I think it's a little more practical. But that
What's
is
the tax in Illinois? Did they come up with that?
So Illinois did it very interestingly. I can give you the breakdown, but they wanted to make an effort to, one, give back to the right parts of state government, like schools, community development, and two, to create tiers that address the different types of products. So they've broken it down into 3 tiers. Of course, sales tax still applies. If the product is over 25% THC, under 25%, or if it's an infused product. So by doing that, they're trying to address the different margins for different products. And I believe there's a 7% tax at wholesale, but they did it in an interesting way. But it's
not like a crazy number, like 35%.
No.
Something like that to the end user.
No.
You mentioned Florida. What's up with Florida's market? I know that like they didn't have flour for a while, and someone told me that they were selling these like flour K-cups where basically like people would like open the top and just pop the flour out.
Yep. Florida started, like many states do, with a low THC program, which I think is pretty harmful. I think it's been states' ways of getting their feet wet, getting comfortable with the idea of a program, but it ends up hurting. It's too restrictive. The companies can't flourish, and it doesn't actually provide much benefit to the patients.
If these medical programs don't offer folks that are seeking relief what they want, they're just going to go to the street. They're not going to. They're not going to be compelled to come into a dispensary. We're at a little bit of a turning point right now, I think, where my dispensary is finally as competitive as street pricing, and I have a much more products. The argument has never been better for someone to go and get their card. Where when we first opened up, and I'm $70 for my most expensive eighth. That's not a very compelling argument to someone who's got a buddy who he trusts who's getting it for $40.
Exactly. It's the relationship to the black market is something I think cannabis entrepreneurs need to respect and understand, and realize that it does have an impact on our day-to-day. And decisions. I think it's important when you're evaluating a new market and when you're setting your prices to think about the black market for a lot of reasons, whether anti-diversion or patient sign-up, like you're talking about, incentivizing people, diversity of product. It's a very real player for us.
So Florida had this like week low THC program.
So they've expanded now. The flower allowance was a big announcement down there. So now they have a pretty well regulated market. It's just being built out. There's a few rise locations that are open. I do, especially on the retail side. I think it's going to be a very healthy market down there. There's a lot of growing expertise in Florida. I spoke to some people down there. Of course, they've had some more diversity snags along the way. The Legislative Black Caucus down there froze the program briefly to address the issue.
Sound about par for the course.
But I think that with their history of agriculture down there, there's some really talented local growers. So I hope to see a lot of greenhouses and a lot of local citrus farmers and people like that participating in the industry.
That's really neat. Any other markets that are kind of on your radar? Arkansas and all?
In the U.S., I think Illinois is the most attractive. On the consulting side, I've had a lot of interest in Michigan coming along. Massachusetts, of course, for another good, healthy recreational market coming on the East Coast. So that's where we've been. And then, of course, I'm always watching and interested in the conservative states like Virginia and southern states that are surprisingly starting to get into it.
That's for us, when we look at these other markets, that's the most interesting for us because it's like the last piece of the country. That and pieces of the Midwest, right, that really haven't been able to crack the whole
Arkansas seems like they have some decent qualifying conditions, and looks like their licensing wasn't overly robust. They're just starting to come online now. But I think honestly the Deep South and around the college circuit, like all of that stuff gets us excited for future markets, and is very much in line with our model. We have a very patient centric, pretty conservative approach in terms of how we look within our community. We got people out there that are way more braggadocious and way more recreationalized than they are medical, and I think that would definitely not fly in a place like that.
Exactly.
But for what we do and our kind of how we do things, it would be more appropriate.
One of the things that I enjoy doing the most is political advocacy, and sort of the environment I've come to love being in more than any is a room full of really conservative, whether politicians or just citizens who don't support this and who, for whatever reason, are opposed. And I see it as just an opportunity. I just really love getting to change people's minds and help teach them with facts, about the realities of this and help them see the upside. And I've gotten to do that on the state level a few times, and now federally, working with a few people down on the Hill, different congressmen who are...
You were there with Gail, right?
Last
time we went down there.
Exactly. Yep, for the Banking Act. And because, these people are going to be the ones creating the new legislation that will affect all of us. So it's... and
it's our responsibility to educate them.
Exactly.
As frustrated as we get that they don't understand what's going on, and we didn't know what was going on in our industry a year and a half ago. How are they going to be experts?
Responsibility is the right word. We're all stewards, I think, of the industry and have a duty to do it.
So I want to go back to that piece when we start diving into opioid. We'll kind of end on that. So the last piece, let's talk international a little bit. So outside the U.S., obviously we know Canada's has an adult use program now for 6 months-ish. Something like that. Was it like the first of the year, or was it?
Canada's, I don't know. When.
Are there any other emerging markets like in Europe or anywhere that like have your attention?
Sure. So the international side is really interesting. My interest was really piqued with the Canadian legalization. As you just said, the supply diminished within 3 days for the entire country. And you'll hear this argued both ways about when there will be enough supply or if they can meet it. In my opinion, it will continue to be a struggle for Canada to supply its consumers for the next several years, maybe more. And I just think that all the numbers that we've seen so far, if you look at what happened there right away, that's I'm pretty confident in that. There are some pretty large scale producers in Canada, more so than anywhere else in the world, that do a great job. But the number of them compared to the population, just I don't have a lot of confidence in that. So I took that idea and figured, like any other product in the world, eventually they're going to have to import it at a lower price. And there's also so many benefits to cannabis markets on the hemp side and the THC side with bringing it to other countries. Jobs, economic stimulus, and other countries are looking around at it thinking to themselves, this could be our chance to become, the exporter or the producer of this.
Yeah, I mean, growing hemp in Sri Lanka is a whole lot cheaper than growing hemp in Alabama.
That's right. And these products, THC and hemp, are cachet exports, which are things like coffee beans that are the value of which is increased by where it's produced. So when you buy a Colombian coffee bean or wine from Bordeaux, part of the value comes in where it was made and how it was made. And other countries are catching on to this. So the last year or so has been a process on both sides, the import and the export, with countries gearing up to be global suppliers and countries gearing up to import it. And they've been regulating it, trying their best at least to regulate it. It's very complicated and very nerve-wracking for a lot of these companies. On the Canadian side, the Canadian Border Agency is sort of their customs. It's a big undertaking for them to figure out logistically how to do this. So what we've been doing, and what I see a big opportunity in, is trying to connect those dots. So the big export countries that are gearing up are mostly South America. Colombia is certainly looking to be the biggest player in export. And so securing kind of the supply side and the local permitting, you talk about relationships and politics, everything is magnified when you go to these other countries, the importance of those things.
At the local level.
Yes. Yeah. So, I have a great partner, Mike Axelrod.
You don't have tons of pull when you walk over to Colombia?
Exactly. The Montgomery County kid just doesn't matter anymore. So you have to find those.
That last name sounds a little familiar.
Yeah, it does. So his dad worked in the Obama administration. We brought him as a strategic advisor to help us navigate these things. And he's been really effective in helping make the right introductions and keeping us, out of trouble and all the really important things to do it the right way when you go into another country. Because on a small scale, when you go into a new state, you have to do right by the community. You have to become a good neighbor. You have to keep people happy. Again, magnified when you go into another country. You not only need to do this for moral and ethical reasons, but there's all kinds of political dynamics at play that make it important to do things right. So there's the supply and export side, and then the import side where being regulated, you've got to get everything approved on both ends, and the logistics in between. That's really, anybody can talk about, have an idea for moving it from one country to another, but the logistics.
Bro, it's tough to move from Salisbury to Baltimore.
Yeah. You gotta love the challenge.
Get some international waters, and like, you're not just getting a boat that's just gonna have your stuff on it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, no one has their own boat. You're going on a shipping vessel. It's got 15,000 other companies' stuff on it. They may not want your bags of weed on that boat.
Let me tell you, try calling a Dutch shipping company and asking about this, and you will get quite an earful. But that's what I love about it. So are there
businesses and companies in other countries that can legally export? Like, if a Canadian company, for example, are there countries that they can legally export to, like, today?
Not yet. Canada is starting to sniff around the export side. There are a couple countries around. Uruguay, oddly enough, was the first to really set up for this around the world that can legally export. The problem is getting a receiver. So you have to have an approved importer, and that seems to be a little bit trickier to get regulated, the import side. I think Canada is really looking to be on the receiving end for a while.
To help fill that demand gap.
Exactly. And so you're seeing countries, Israel, I think, will be a great exporter. I know they're interested. are working on regulating it. There's some political complexities there, but the level of research and science and medicine that Israel puts into this industry is amazing. Yeah. So I think they'll be players.
When you get into the industry and you realize that in 1976, Machula was in Israel in a lab working.
That's it. They have the largest medical research database, I'm pretty sure, in Israel.
I would agree that. And but to your point, it might be easier for someone in South America from a climate and a geographic stand. Like once we start getting this global competition, it'll be IP, but it'll also be distance and like all these other things that'll play into it.
And I think there will be a kind of like we have in the craft beer industry, an artisan market where consumers are attracted to the methods by which it was grown. There's it's kind of a novelty element to something that's grown in the sun in Colombia, and same as with the coffee. And so for me, one of the important aspects is bringing that process to the end consumer and documenting and showing it along the way and doing things the right way, sustainably and socially conscious. I think internationally, the single biggest challenge facing any company trying to enter the cannabis space is the commoditization of the product. It's an inevitability. It's happening right now in front of us. And everyone is sort of, I think, looking to start off with hemp and either stick with it or eventually transition into THC. But right now, the game is about proof of concept. Just this morning, I read that Pharmacy Yellow was able to move a package from Colombia to Switzerland. And these are single, one-time executions right now that are happening infrequently that are big. I mean, the ability to just get it, even a small volume of product from point A to point B, and show that you're able to get the approvals and through all the regulations, it's all proof of concept right now. So
there was no big win, like no one made any money off of that. It was just look what we did, and we didn't get arrested.
And but I guarantee you they're celebrating, rightfully so. It's a big accomplishment, and it's good progress. But I think
I can't imagine the lack of guidelines on an international level. I mean, literally, we didn't know if I could drive to Centerville and pick up vape pens from GTI.
Exactly.
And no one could tell us whether we were breaking the rules or not breaking the rules. And I wasn't breaking interstate commerce.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or international trade regulations.
That's it. Like international treaties and laws. I mean, like.
So one thing I learned from Maryland that I applied to this is I used to be afraid of the regulators. I used to just look at them like they were the police ready to pull me over. In reality, they're incredibly important relationships that it has to be done the right way. But if you engage with them early on, you can often end up with an opportunity to affect the regulations, to help advise them on it, and make sure that you're doing things right. And to your point, it's very, very complicated internationally. I love that aspect, and that's what really gets me charged up about this. It's also what's keeping a lot of people out. Is it's super complicated and risky, but it's a lot of fun. And the commoditization, the pricing, I think most of the companies are trying to strike a balance between, again, just like in Maryland, first mover advantage, wanting to be early to market, but also not knowing what to do on pricing quite yet, and trying to test the waters and try to get, gauge the markets on pricing early so that they don't overcommit and end up purchasing, an unreasonable amount of
setting pricing is really difficult. When we first got our first batch of product, we got obviously some advising from Curio, and luckily everyone, actually they didn't. I mean, a lot of people stepped to Keystone pricing, but like you had Allegheny, who was charging, I think, $25 a gram all the way up with no break, and like really putting a bad taste in people's mouth. And I mean, we knew that we had to be more expensive than we wanted to be, because we had to be. We were the first ones open, and we knew that inventory and demand was going to be the demand was going to be much higher than the inventory that we had. But you still want to be fair to patients, and you understand this is a medicine for patients, so it really is tricky. And then back to the regulator piece. I mean, we have a really great relationship with the MMCC inspectors. Because we dialogue with them. Right. I make my general manager, every time we get an inspection, our team has to deliver 3 questions that aren't in the regulations to them to seek clarity.
Nice.
So that we're having these active engagements. And when you go to them and you pose questions, it becomes this working dynamic. You get this equal business stature where you guys are two folks in a working group in an industry, not so much like you're my boss or in charge of me. Our first inspection was not that way. I remember being scared to death of David Close. And like,
well, the black SUVs don't help with the intimidation either.
no, I mean, they rolled off. I was like, is Obama back there? I mean, geez Louise.
I was like, oh God, it's over.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, at one point they were looking at our packing area, and we had a 3-inch by 3-inch square area in the very corner that wasn't covered by the camera. And he goes, "Who's the COO?" And Chuck raises his hand, and he goes, "How do you feel about there being a blind spot in your packing area?" And Mary Pat is like, "Listen, like I worked in a pharmacy for years, and there's way more dangerous substances, and there's tons of blind spots.
Yep.
Like we have a training in place, we hired the right people, like we have protocol in place to track diversion, like, and really had to like kind of like because at one point like I was trying to do that a little bit myself, and I remember looking at them and they were like, "This isn't going well. Stop talking to the inspectors." So it was
cut that conversation off quickly.
That's it. I mean, the regulations are. I've come to realize that they are your friend if you study them and respect them, and that they can really give you an advantage.
Transparency is king too, right? Like if you're not being shady and like you have, I mean, there's been a couple of rules where we've been like, hey, this isn't the best favor. Even like when the damn metric kept crashing, and I got patients that are standing out waiting for their medicine. I can't serve them.
2 hours away and came in a wheelchair.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And working with them and saying, look, we gotta get an exemption policy up here, and I'm dialoguing with Joy and dialoguing with the commissioners and saying there's got to be something we can do here.
Now imagine doing that in Spanish. It's like in a country that you know nothing about.
So how's your Spanish game?
I'm working on. I'm taking online weekly online classes. Yeah, it's actually terrible, but I'm trying to learn a little. I need to learn a little bit, but the interface with the regulators is fascinating. It's entry level right now for them. They're all trying to figure it out.
They're learning too, right? Like this is an FDA inspector who's been on the job for 26 years, has been to 10,000 pharmaceutical plants, and you're 10,001, and he's ready to go. I mean, a lot of these guys, hell, especially us. I mean, they could have only been to 3 other dispensaries before they came to us, because we were the 6th one approved, and I know that there was other ones that were approved in the same timeline as us. So like it was a learning experience for those guys too. And you see their demeanor change as they get more confident in their job, and they know what they're doing. They're not as standoffish either. So it's
everybody realizes that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, right.
Because
everyone's fucked up enough times, made enough mistakes that we're like, all right, we can't be too high on a pedestal either way.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. We're all human.
We're all
trying to figure it out.
Because we stared at those regulations for how long before we were actually able to like open and process product, right? But you stare at them for so long, and you have this idea of what it should look like in your head, and everybody's idea is slightly different, right, than everybody else's.
There's also room for ambiguity and for your own decision making within those regulations,
and they affect your entire business strategy. So finding that stuff out early is important.
May have a clinical director or shall have a clinical director.
Exactly.
That's a big fucking deal.
Exactly.
All right. So, how old are you?
31.
31. So definitely a young buck compared to my old 37-year-old ass.
You wouldn't guess from the hairline, though. That was the casualty of starting Chesapeake. I swear I lost all my hair. The stress.
I just turned gray. I was able to keep mine just more gray.
I am so much more gray than I do now. And speaking of Obama, I think he's a president you could see who aged tremendously in office.
Yeah.
And I feel like our poor general manager, Cody, is along that same aging schedule.
It's stressful, man. It's not.
He came in as a young buck, and he's looking older and older every day. So I kind of feel like I'm in the golden era of the opioid epidemic. I was in 11th grade when I saw kids start stealing their parents' pills and snorting them, and then they couldn't get pills anymore, and then heroin came, and then I'm even to the point now where like it's once a month that someone from one of the 4 classes of 2 up and 2 down just lose a life. And it is something that I think is a really compelling It's really compelling when you put the two together next to each other, when you put cannabis and opioids next to each other. And there's been this year-long this lifelong narrative that, well, if you get it from a doctor, it's probably healthier than if you get something on the street. And cannabis is this big bad drug of Schedule I. It has no medicinal value, but let's just ignore this research and just start giving oxys out for long-term use, right? And things like that. So do you want to share, I mean, you have a really personal story. I mean, I know that your application even reflected the name and memorial of your buddy.
And I appreciate the chance to talk about this. I think it's an important issue. It's by far the single most significant motivator for me in the industry. It's, I wake up every day with a fire lit to try to make an impact on this, and it did prompt my interest in the space. I've been impacted by it, like you said. Our demographic, it hits everyone, is the truth. It's not just white guys in their 30s. It's everybody, families. It's a street drug. It's everywhere. It just happened to have a big impact on my life from multiple angles. I lost great friends, and basically for me, I read some research that indicated that it could have a real reduction on the addiction rates, the overdose rates, the pain management options, and I just decided there's really something to this. And I understood the opioid agonist addiction treatments, which are Suboxone, methadone, things like that. I understood those were the most medically accepted treatment protocols
kind of substitution
at the time.
Therapy.
Yeah, and I tried to educate myself more about how that stuff really works, how it works on the receptors in the brain, what is it accomplishing and what is it not. And I ended up just, deciding that I wanted to bring products that helped people deal with this. I wanted to work one-on-one with people, anything I could do to help people get off of opioids or have this as an alternative. And I did. I named the parent company in Maryland, JB17 LLC, which is named after John Blumberg, who is one of my best friends and classmates, fraternity brother, who battled opiate addiction for 5-8 years. And I had a very personal window into it and worked with him and his family a lot and saw his struggle. And, so a lot of what we do is in his memory. And it really, I follow the research closely. It's an issue that's so controversial that, I've worked with municipal, state, federal politicians on this. Not everyone understands it, and because of the federal law, it's lacking some credibility or legitimacy behind the research and the statistics. We've seen research that does indicate, up to 25% reduction in the opiate fatality rates when medical or recreational programs are launched.
The JAM article.
Yeah, and the counter arguments, in my experience, are always, there's no peer-reviewed long-term research studies on this, and things like that. But the truth is that if you dig hard enough into this topic, there is real credible research out there, from Journal of American Medicine, CDC, lots of different places. And there's no question. I mean, it's saving lives. I think both from the opiate withdrawal perspective, treating the symptoms of withdrawal, and helping people get through it in a safe way. Maintenance of whether it's, if someone was self-medicating for things like anxiety or things like that, and pain management maintenance. And then something that I really believe in, that I want to see, is this becoming an option from the point of prescription, we'll call it. The time when somebody leaves the dentist or the ER or wherever, rather than getting that prescription for OxyContin at the pharmacy. I want those people to be able to go, do not pass go, straight to the dispensary and go see Mary Pat and get your capsule or your tincture instead of, not in addition to, but instead of. It only takes 3 days for the brain to start becoming dependent on opioids. And with the prescription rates, I mean, people are set up for failure. So Illinois tried to regulate this by adding opioid use disorder to their qualifying conditions. And it did work. I mean, to their credit, they're the only state that has actually executed on this and done anything. It it works. It's still pretty restrictive, though. It requires a unique type of certification. What I've found and what I've been working with Maryland with is that adding opioid use disorder as a qualifying condition isn't necessarily the best and most impactful way to do it, in part because it forces someone to be classified in this narrow window of opioid use disorder, when in reality, we don't necessarily know why.
There could be mental health issues.
Exactly.
There could be other drivers
Exactly.
that are
People
chronic
shouldn't
pain.
have exactly. They shouldn't have to be labeled in this very specific classification. Again, coming back to access, it should be accessible to any person who would otherwise be getting an opioid, or maybe they already have one, or maybe they're addicted to street opioids. And then, the last point that leads me to is synthetic versus non-synthetic opioids. A lot of times people, when they think about the opioid epidemic, they think about bottles of OxyContin. And that's true. The synthetics are a huge problem. And the medical marijuana markets are having the biggest impact on synthetic opioid addiction. Again, these are, Percocets, OxyContin, things like that, anything made in a lab. What they're not targeting, for a number of reasons, are the non-synthetic opioids, the heroin and fentanyl that are infiltrating the streets. And one of the challenges that I see someone in my position having is, how do I bring legal cannabis businesses to communities where people from that demographic will get a positive impact, where they will come to the store and, take the time to come in and replace their opioids with cannabis. But right now, with pricing the way it is and with regulations, it's hard to tap into lower income communities. And it's a challenge that, I hope to meet in due time. But
You bring up an excellent point. So I get to see what we do in our dispensary day in and day out, right? So I've seen all the research, and I know that it's not necessarily FDA clinical trial research as you would find with other stuff, but it's still medical research. And to your point, JAMA, Journal of American Medicine, has a really good article where they did retrospective. That's what they did retrospective, right, Dr. Hoffman? JAMA, is that the retrospective one? But I get to see the anecdotal of them coming in and these folks saying, and the folks that have the dependency, which I think that's a better word than addiction, because they get there a lot of different ways. So they became dependent upon this pill. For some of them was a car accident, some of it was a surgery, some of it was they were abusing coke before that, and they were abusing alcohol before that, and they've had a history of abusing multiple substances. So I think it's important to have a very diverse mindset of, just because, to your point, someone has a dependency or an addiction to opioids, it's really tough to put them into a box or a category outside of that one characteristic. There's a lot of characteristics lead up to that. For the folks that have chronic pain that are looking for something for a substitution side of things, we do a great job in handling those patients because we have a substance that will help substitute. For the patients that have abused a lot of other things and they have these underlying mental health issues, then those patients sometimes can be more challenging for us to help if we don't address the mental health issues or the underlying issues first. So it's when you talk about this, I think a lot of people immediately put in their personal biases and their own perspective, and they think about the person that they know that battled with opioids. Mm-hmm. But for us, I've seen the variety and skew of patients that come to us and say, okay, I'm here because for the last 4 years, I'm constipated. And a lot of these are functioning folks. They don't necessarily look like they have anything going on, like a lot of folks with mental health issues and anxiety and depression, right? They're not screaming for help, but by the time they get to us, they're in need, and we work with them. And I see them bragging on social. I see them bragging to us that, hey, I haven't had a pain pill, or I haven't had a sleeping pill, and benzos, and even it goes beyond opiates. I mean, some of the stuff like Lyrica. You talk to a fibromyalgia patient that had a bad experience on Lyrica, and they'll tell you some nightmarish stories. And they come into us, and we get them on cannabis, and it's like night and day.
Right.
And I think the other thing they find a lot of times, and we see this through the events and stuff that we have, is they find other people like-minded that are struggling with the same issues, and they come together as a community and kind of have that bond around cannabis and tell war stories about the past and the opiate addiction and all these other things. And I think you were kind of speaking toward to that point earlier where it's a community and they can come in and feel supported. And it's something that we try to engage with them.
Recovery resource centers, like the local, once you would get out of inpatient or outpatient treatment, you would go there for some resources in terms of getting a job, getting kind of back on your feet. And we had some really great meetings with them in the last couple of weeks, and they're believers in what we do. We've reached out to some of the treatment centers. I mean, this is why Comico goes purple, which is the big opioid awareness launch campaign. And we're in those conversations, and I inject myself there. We sponsored the Mental Health Matters 5K because, it's not, I refuse to look at myself as someone who's not on the same team.
That's it. That's exactly it. It's my perspective on this is that I know that addiction and mental health are complicated enough to realize that I'm not going to understand each individual person's relationship to it, nor should I have to, or nor should that matter. Coming back to access, that's people ask me about being in the industry, and I would say that the most proud title that I could assign to myself is advocate. And actually, Gail Rand with Forward Grow, whom you mentioned before, she and I have done a lot of these things together. I really admire her advocacy prowess, and she's not only a really good friend, but has helped guide me through that advocacy and political process. And she and I have talked extensively about the opioid issue and worked with state legislators in Maryland for we attempted to get them to approve a new amendment, which would have basically done what Illinois did, but in this case, it would have allowed for same-day temporary registration. So if somebody went to the dentist and had a root canal, they would get a 90-day provisional registration that took immediate effect, which I still think is a good concept, and I plan to.
I do too.
I think it's a great concept.
We don't talk about it a lot. So
yeah.
This is why I love having great guests on. So I never really thought about if you had I've always thought about the opioid clause as, well, maybe that'll make physicians feel more comfortable if they see it listed there. I've never really thought about the fact that, well, you're kind of putting them in a box.
Exactly. It's counterproductive. We thought the same thing initially, but with states like Maryland that already have a catch-all incorporated into the qualifying conditions,
which is what it normally falls under.
Exactly. And the more restrictive you get with classifications, the less impactful it becomes. So we eventually decided, with the catch-all already existing, the opioid use disorder qualifying condition would actually be counterproductive. So better to hold off on that. We're going to be right back there. I can promise you I'll be in the state house next year pitching the revised version of this. The big hurdle that we faced was the liability and logistics of how to allow a patient of any physician or any medical provider, maybe that's an emergency room or a dentist, regardless of whether they are registered with the state of Maryland as a certifying provider. Again, impact, we want broad reach, and the liability of those folks, who are tied into whatever professional medical association, being willing to say, instead of this proven pharmaceutical, I am suggesting to you that you use medical cannabis, which is not federally approved.
And how Chicago Trust Insurance or whatever insurance companies are involved
exactly.
with that.
There are pieces to it, complexities in that section of it that I still needed to figure out, but really I won't stop until I see Maryland and other states not just approve this but legislate it, and I think that's a key point here. Legislating it, taking it out of the hands and the opinions of the providers and saying that by law this is allowed. And each time I've been in the political setting for this, the counter argument is almost always from, in some way, the addiction lobby, meaning the methadone and Suboxone companies, who, again, point to extensive research. They're huge political donors oftentimes. And, so that mentality really is the fight. And so
they're kind of an extension of Big Pharma in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And so just to wrap this up, what I've learned and what I'm now most focused on is critical is at the federal level. In order for all of us at the table to start seeing day-to-day meaningful change on these topics, the federal law has to change. And not just change specifically, I think the DEA descheduling is the single most important thing that has to happen first. On my way down here today, I'm a close relationship with Congressman Eric Swalwell from California, and he and I have met and talked extensively about this. And at the federal level, they don't fully understand, the legislators don't fully understand how logistically to make this happen. They all want interstate commerce and to open the banking laws and things like that. But without the DEA moving it off of the scheduling charts, nothing else tangible really happens, because you can't allocate federal funds. You can't.
That's what always goes back to, Schedule 1, Schedule 1, Schedule 1.
Exactly. And until we can do that and it's legitimate at the federal level, can be researched, interstate commerce can take place, we're never going to reach that level that we all want of legitimacy, credibility, and we're not going to be able to look at the Suboxone companies and say, actually, we do have this research or this study proving this point, and we need that.
When Congressman Harris or some of the stauncher, more folks that aren't as open-minded to cannabis as a medicine come at me with this straw argument of the research, it's like, well, you've put my hands and my arms behind my back, you blindfolded me in a race with Suboxone on research, and I can't. There's no way I can compete against that, nor will I ever. They have the money for the lobby. They have the money for the research. They have all these different things. And until cannabis companies can compete and do the same level of... All the research that comes out from cannabis now, for the most part, it's getting better every day. But Alabama is the only university. They have shitty weed.
Exactly.
The studies are done were horrible. They were set up for failure. They were almost set up so that there could be some evidence and it wouldn't be very appealing.
Exactly.
And shut things down. So I'm glad you brought that up, and thank you so much for all of your advocacy at the federal level and the state level. I've seen you down there doing the deeds. Now that we have general managers in place, it's my interest to try to be more involved in those discussions, and we go down to the MMCC meetings and try to participate when we can. But to your point, the federal level, until that happens, the majority of our issues for how we run our business don't come from the state of Maryland. They come from the federal government. So it truly is. When we bitch about the taxes and the banking and all these things, it's all federal. If it was a Schedule 2 drug, we wouldn't have any of these issues. So
So what do you do? How much better has it gotten in the last months, year, as far as at the federal level, people's openness and willingness to look at things like descheduling and just the little intricacies, I guess?
I've been pleasantly surprised, and Congressman Swalwell gets a lot of credit for this in bringing in colleagues, both sides of the aisle. We've had amazing discussions with Congressman Gates from Florida and other folks like him who are pretty staunch Republicans whom you wouldn't necessarily expect to be so open-minded to cannabis. But once you break it down, give them our perspective inside the industry on the business side and explain, how each legislative option would have an impact in reality, it makes it much easier for them to understand. For example, the interstate commerce appeal and the economic drivers that can happen with federal legalization are, especially for those conservative states that maybe aren't really sure how they feel about this, a lot of the business incentives, banking, 100%. Banking's a massive issue for all of us. But again, research, FDA, DEA, and what we've always come back to is there was a lot of talk last year on the Hill about rescheduling cannabis, so moving it to Schedule 2 or 3. I, firmly oppose that because it just won't have a tangible effect. Sure, it may make it easier for banks to act as a holding tank for cannabis companies in individual markets, but it's not going to achieve what we all want to see, which is the credibility. And if we're going to call this stuff medicine, which it is, then we need to treat it like that. And right now, with markets being isolated by themselves, recreating products that are consistent, standardized, at high quality is next to impossible when you have a vertical supply chain in each individual market. So
yeah, can you imagine being like Procter & Gamble and you have 15,000 widgets in Virginia and you got no widgets in Maryland and you can't move your widgets from Virginia warehouse to the Maryland warehouse? I mean, it would be fucking nuts. And even for us, like, honestly, truthfully, one of the biggest drivers to the adult use program for us would be the fact that citizens from Delaware and Virginia that are 10 miles away or to Delaware and 30 miles for Virginia would be able to participate. Right. Like, these are all, like, they don't participate in our market not because they don't want to, or, you know what I mean? It's strictly because we have these very tight state by state rules. Every state's different. It makes it, the reason why you can be a consultant is because Maryland's different from Virginia. Virginia's different from Florida. Every single state has got a different program. And I would argue that one of the biggest challenges we face, as I kind of alluded to earlier, as an industry and as creating a singleized voice, is we have all these different interests. There's so much segregation in between the operators that it's tough to have a unified voice like big tobacco or big pharma or big alcohol. Those guys, you know, when it's their lobby day, and no matter what they say behind the other 364 days, they're locked and loaded with their agenda. They're ready to roll. Yep. We kind of come in.
Everybody wants something else, right?
Something else, and we don't come very unified, and we don't do a great job of that. And I think that if we're ever going to want to make these larger changes, we're going to have to get better at that, truthfully. So
that's a great point. I agree.
Man,
unified voice.
Thank you so much, Unified Voice, for coming down.
Appreciate you guys.
Give me anything you want to plug, any websites, social media pages, anything like that?
I'm good. Thank you.
If you're someone politically connected with capital and emerging market, reach out to Mike Cardozo.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.